Hey everybody, this is JDGaming back today with another episode of Get Better at Yu-Gi-Oh! Now in today's episode we're going to be talking about how to assign some sort of value to your cards, not outside of the game in the secondary market, but rather in-game. And to do that we're going to use the concepts of utility and synergy that these cards have so that you can decide, is a card particularly good in a specific deck, in a specific matchup, or just in general. It'll help you weigh these factors and then decide, is a card something that has potential or something that you should just toss into your bin for the time being. As usual, any articles that have inspired this episode are in the description box down below, as well as some related articles that you may find interesting. I'm trying to share pretty much my knowledge that I've built up reading all these articles throughout the year, so hopefully this will help you guys out. Otherwise, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Many of you guys who have been following my channel for a while know that I'm a huge fan of the Banish Psychics, where we pretty much use witches and wizards to abuse cards like Esper Girl, and basically maintain and generate free cards while we go for big synchro summons and other gimmicky plays using things like Psychic Jumper and other tech. A lot of you guys are familiar with this deck type because of Jeff Jones' 2012 topping with Grand Soil, the Elemental Lord, and quite honestly, although I've experimented with it, I have a huge love-hate relationship with Grand Soil, mainly because of its very specific summoning conditions. Anyone unfamiliar with the card, I'll briefly say, you pretty much need 5 of the corresponding attribute card in the graveyard to be able to summon this guy. Exactly, no more, no less. And in that sense, it's pretty much like Dark Armed Dragon. Now, whereas these Elemental Lords don't have the limited status as Dark Armed Dragon, which in a sense makes it more playable because you're able to have 5 cards build up in your grave while you draw into a copy of your Elemental Lord, it's still way too particular and I never really liked it. But if you look at Grand Soil, I mean, its effect is Monster Reborn. That's an amazing thing, right? There's no question that Grand Soil is a powerful card. However, what I feel like it lacks is utility. And by that, I mean you can't play it at the beginning of the game. You'll have to wait until kind of the middle or late game when some cards have been played, you land some things in the graveyard, and especially with nowadays, with the faster and faster metagames that we tend to play in, that just isn't feasible anymore. In other words, Grand Soil lacks value at all stages in the game. It's very bad to draw in the opening where it'll hinder us, handicap us, pretty much slow us down to a crawl, whereas it does have a little bit of a payoff in the mid or late games. And so that's the definition of utility that I'll be using throughout this video. Basically, a card has utility if it is as useful to you as the player in as many states of the game as possible. The beginning, middle, and end when some, and many cards have been played. Take a look at a card like Raiden, Hand of the Lightsworn. Now, Raiden has a lot of things going for it. Just reading through the card real fast, it's a Lightsworn monster. It has the light attribute and all of that support. It's a level 4, it's a tuner, it's a warrior, it's got 1700 attack points, and an amazing ability that allows you to set up your graveyard with a lot of key cards. Now, if you look at Raiden at the beginning of the game, this is a great opener because it lets you set up your graveyard, trigger some effects, whatever you want to do with kind of a card trooper-like effect, it'll help you get that set up. But what if you're not focused on milling things to the graveyard anymore? Well, in the middle or late game, you could still use it for an attacker. 1700 plus the ability to power it up with Honest is a very nice combination. It can even get stronger if you're playing it with other Lightsworns. You can easily play it as a tuner monster or Xyz material because of its level 4 tuner status, and the fact that it's a warrior, it's a Lightsworn, means you have a lot of access to search cards that can get you this card whenever you need as well. So Raiden's an example of a card with overall very high utility. You can use it for so many different things at so many stages in the game. Very rarely will you draw into a Raiden and think, oh well, this card's absolutely useless. Granted, there are situations where maybe your opponent has an established board, and this isn't the card that's going to help you out of that situation. But it's usually going to be something that'll help you in some capacity at different stages in the game. Another popular card right now with high utility is Archfiend Eccentric. Her Pendulum effect lets you go and destroy a spell or trap a la MST, and that monster effect lets you get rid of opposing monsters. And if you're able to pendulum summon her, you can use both of those effects the same turn, and then every time you pendulum summon her again, you can destroy another monster. This is a very useful card because, one, its ability serves to solve problems. It answers threats that your opponent has, clears the way for attacks, gets rid of annoying monsters that may be difficult to get rid of otherwise through battle, and overall, the fact that you can play it again and again, and as soon as you draw it, means it has a lot of utility throughout all stages of the game. In the beginning, it might not be the most powerful thing, as its effects only work when your opponent has things that have been invested to the board. But as a scale 7, all of a sudden, if you're playing it in a pendulum strategy, you can just use it to go off and make your proactive summons in the first place, and that's assuming you went first and your opponent committed nothing. If you're going second, you could very well use either or both of its effects, clear the way for some plays, and then go and make all your plays. So it can become a powerful enabler in the beginning, middle, and end of the game. Where it probably is the weakest is actually going to be if you end up top decking this thing in a war against your opponent, but nowadays especially the end game rarely becomes one where you're top decking and running out of resources. It's more of you're just hit so fast in the face that you're gonna die in terms of life points. So there are some factors that may not make this card the most high utility in all formats throughout history, but as it stands right now, it's pretty useful throughout the entire dueling experience. And finally, another card that a lot of people are tending to shove to the side is Raigeki. This card is an insane piece of removal that shadows Dark Hole completely because of its high utility. If you draw this in the early game, especially now with faster formats, you could go second, drop a Raigeki to clear your opponent's board potentially, and then just go off with your remaining 5 cards. There are strategies that will actually be able to win off of that. Not necessarily the best play, because you'd be wasting potentially a very powerful removal effect without any guarantee that your move would stick, but that's something that you can do with Raigeki. As you get into the middle or late game, you can clear out annoying monsters, hordes of monsters that your opponent has stockpiled on their board, or even just clear the board and force a game-ending scenario out of nowhere. Raigeki ends up being useful because of its lack of cost and because of its lack of repercussions. Unlike Dark Hole, which is something that may become tricky in the middle or late game, where you want to keep your forces alive, Raigeki has no such problems. You just go clear your opponent's board and all of a sudden you shove the game, accelerate to the end where you're able to attack for game. Those are just 3 quick examples of cards that tend to have high utility, and again, it's not an all-inclusive list. As the game evolves, you'll see some cards fall in and out of favor, and of course, as Konami prints new cards, there will be new options to consider that'll shake up the entire thing. But beyond utility, there's another thing that you need to consider in a card's potential worth, and that is synergy. You'll probably know where this is going when you see Dandelion, but when this first came out, it was a random jump promo, synchro summoning wasn't a thing, and this thing was really valued for its ability to serve as a solid defender that potentially set up tribute summons or combos with other cards that could take advantage of the tokens. Yes, it was a limited card for that useful ability, but not because of synchro summoning. Then we look at a card like Lone Fire Blossom. I mean, this thing originally came out in Phantom Darkness. That's before synchro summoning came out. And so you would use this to maybe bring out some big plant monster, but it really was just a random support card that didn't have any huge competitive uses. But then the synchro mechanic came in a few sets later, and then we started having things like Debris Dragon be printed, and all of a sudden, we can start using all of these things together. We start seeing synergy, the positive interaction between cards that allows us to go and maximize utility of the components, and then create something that's more than just the sum of the parts. As this happened, Konami started releasing cards like Spore and Glow Up Bulb to add to this strategy. And what started off as a hodgepodge of random cards that were released throughout the years, one card at a time, eventually became one of the most successful and feared strategies that was built on synergy between cards. Synchro monsters are the perfect example of how synergy happens. I mean, you're taking a tuner and a non-tuner that aren't very useful on their own and combining them into a game-winning force like Trishula or Hyper Librarian. Of course, it's not like a card has to be related to synchro summoning to be synergetic. The idea is any card that has the ability to combine with another in order to increase how useful each card is at more points of the game. In other words, increase overall utility of both cards, and then potentially increase the power cap that these two cards can create. In other words, what's the biggest play you can make? If you can improve that, you have some synergy, and that becomes the basis for some of the most competitive decks that you can create. Here's an example of one of the decks I created on my channel that I really enjoyed for its use of utility and synergy. It uses cards like Genex Undyne, which will let you go and use its effect, sending a water monster to the graveyard as a cost in order to be able to go and add a Genex controller to the hand. The reason this is so important is because whereas Genex Undyne's utility isn't the best, I mean, it's really mainly focused at the beginning for setup purposes on its own, I was able to create synergies with this strategy in order to make it more useful overall. First, the whole point is to use Treeborn Frog again and again, so when this thing comes back in the standby phase, I can then tribute summon something like Salvage Warrior, and now all of a sudden the Genex controller I have can be used for a synchro summon of something powerful like Beals or Psyframe Lord Omega. But it goes beyond just setting up tribute summons. That's one way to use it, and that's why I wanted the Treeborn Frog. But what about if I draw the Genex controller or Undyne later in the game and I don't necessarily need the Treeborn Frog setup? Well, I can combo it with cards like Allure of Darkness, trading in these two cards to draw two new ones, and then that'll hopefully allow me to draw into useful tech pieces like this. Gores is an amazing card that's had this huge reputation throughout the game's history of being a game changer. Nowadays, I don't know if it's quite that much because it isn't as difficult to get over. But the fact that it's a 27 beater that brings out another monster that's potentially even stronger, and in this deck, free materials for synchro summons, tribute summons, and whatever, makes it a very powerful card that takes advantage of the fact that Treeborn has no back row for its effect to activate, and the fact that it's a level 7 means you can use it with level 1 tuners like Glow Up Bulb or Jet Synchron to be able to make your powerful level 8s that the deck is all about. And then, of course, we have here JDGaming, which basically lets you go and get rid of your Treeborn Frog in the standby phase to abuse that. But it also serves as a high utility card because you're able to use that other ability, change the battle position of an opponent's monster. Maybe you want to make something go into defense position so you can hit it with a piercing effect or flip it up with Black Rose Dragon. Maybe you just want to use this as a last-ditch defense to protect yourself, or maybe you want that second effect to steal your opponent's monster in the battle phase and dish out some extra damage. Econ is a high utility card that individually may not be useful, but when you're able to fuel that cost with something like Treeborn Frog via the Undyne, you're able to take advantage of this interaction and then get more out of that trade than you would otherwise. So this water synchro deck that I'm always updating periodically on this channel is just an example where you could take cards with decent utility, decent synergy abilities, and then create some fun strategy that becomes cohesive. It starts working because you're able to use the strengths of each individual card and then overlay them with the strengths that they share when put in combination. And there you have it, a quick crash course into the concepts of utility and synergy that'll hopefully help you guys look at some cards, evaluate, does this thing have potential for what I want to do with it, and then hopefully will make better use, hopefully will allow you to make better use of these cards in your decks. Sometime soon, may or may not be next week, I'm planning on doing a discussion or maybe even another episode of Get Better at Yu-Gi-Oh! Where I discuss combining different archetypes to make a cohesive strategy based on synergy and some of the problems and hurdles that you may come up with in those types of instances. Anyway, let me know down below what you thought of this episode. Give it a like if you did, because that really helps with exposure of this content to other potential people who may enjoy it. And if you have any suggestions on future episodes, then please let me know, and I'd love to consider those. Thanks guys, this is JDGaming, hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.